All right, so today we are diving into some pretty deep waters.
Yeah.
The Communist Manifesto.
Big one.
It's 1848. Europe's kind of like a powder keg of revolutions, and two guys, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, they drop this pamphlet that is still sending shockwaves.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Through the world today.
It is.
So we're going to unpack kind of why this document is so powerful, so controversial.
Right.
And like what it even means for you even now.
Yeah, it's amazing how a text written, in such specific circumstances can speak to so many different eras and situations. I mean, the ideas in this manifesto have fueled debates and inspired movements for over a century and a half.
Exactly. And, some people hear Communist Manifesto and they immediately think, oh, this is about like overthrowing the government.
Right.
But it's so much more than that. It's like a deep critique of capitalism.
Wow.
And it lays out this idea of history as this constant struggle between the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, that's right. Marx and Engels. They famously said, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles.
Whoa.
That's the essence of historical materialism.
Okay.
They argued that, every stage of history is shaped by this conflict, whether it's like feudal lords versus serfs.
Right.
Or in their time, the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, versus the proletariat, the working class.
And they saw capitalism as this revolutionary force,
Yeah.
but one that was inherently flawed. Like they believed it created this incredible wealth, but also this massive inequality and something called alienation of labor.
Right.
So for example, imagine working in a factory where you spend all day, you're making just one tiny part of a product and you never even see the finished thing.
Right.
You're basically a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
You're disconnected from the final result of your work.
Yeah.
And that's alienation.
And that disconnect, Marx argued, has these really deep consequences for individuals and society as a whole. It makes work feel meaningless. It robs people of their sense of purpose and creativity.
Right.
It's a critique that's still relevant today as we see, rising concerns about automation, the gig economy, and this kind of erosion of traditional work structures.
Yeah, absolutely. And this ties into another big theme, the revolutionary potential of the working class. Marx and Engels saw the proletariat as this massive force that was being exploited under capitalism.
Right.
Remember that powerful line, workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about a call to action.
Definitely a call to action. They believed that capitalism was creating the conditions for its own demise.
Oh, wow.
By concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few, it was also creating this massive class of people who had every reason to rise up and demand change.
So what was the solution that they proposed?
Well, they proposed overthrowing capitalism and establishing socialism.
Okay.
A system where the means of production, factories, land, resources would be owned communally, not by individuals.
Right. Okay.
So it was a pretty radical idea.
Yeah.
And, it's sparked endless debate and, of course, controversy.
What's fascinating to me is how Marx and Engels, they predicted the rise of globalization. I mean, this is 1848.
Yeah, it's incredible.
They foresaw how capitalism would create a global marketplace, erasing national boundaries in the pursuit of profit.
Absolutely.
It's wild to think about how prescient they were. I mean, just look at how global supply chains affect our lives today.
It's true.
We're all connected in ways that they could only imagine.
Yeah, and that global interconnectedness raises some important questions about how their critique of capitalism applies to the world we live in today.
Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. What about those 20th century communist regimes? We can't ignore the atrocities committed under leaders like Stalin, Mao, and others. That's something we're definitely going to unpack as we continue.
Yeah, we have to address it.
Or deep dive.
We'll also explore some of the other criticisms of Marx's ideas. Because even if you disagree with his proposed solutions, there's no denying that his analysis of capitalism has had a profound impact on the world.
It's a text that keeps sparking debate and inspiring new interpretations even centuries later.
It really is.
It's like this intellectual earthquake that keeps sending out aftershocks.
Before we get into all of that, though, there's one more key theme I think we need to address.
Okay.
Marx and Engels' critique of private property.
Yeah, and this is often misunderstood.
It is.
So let's be clear, Marx wasn't talking about your personal belongings, your clothes, your phone, your books.
Right.
He was focused on the private ownership of the means of production.
Exactly. Things like factories, land, natural resources, the things that you need to create wealth.
Okay.
Marx argued that this kind of private ownership led to the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few,
Right.
at the expense of the many.
And that critique is something that resonates even today, right?
Oh, absolutely.
We see it in discussions about corporate power income inequality and the role of the state in regulating the economy.
Absolutely. Marx's ideas continue to inform debates about fairness, justice, and the balance of power in society.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how some economists today, even those who don't embrace all of Marx's ideas, acknowledge the validity of some of his critiques.
Right.
Particularly when it comes to issues like income inequality and the exploitation of labor.
So even if someone doesn't agree with everything in the Communist Manifesto, it's a text that challenges you to think critically about the systems we live under and the kind of world we want to create.
It forces us to ask tough questions about power, wealth, and the meaning of work in our lives. And those questions are as relevant today as they were in 1848.
All right, so we've kind of laid some groundwork here. We've explored the historical context. We've unpacked Marx and Engels' main arguments and touched on some of the key themes, but we're just getting started.
We're just getting started.
Next, we're going to dive headfirst into the controversies surrounding the Communist Manifesto.
As we are.
And you won't want to miss it.
It's going to get really interesting. When we talk about the Communist Manifesto, we can't really ignore the shadow cast by those 20th century communist regimes.
Right.
I mean, the atrocities committed under leaders like Stalin and Mao, they're a stark reminder of how ideology can be twisted and manipulated to justify horrific acts.
Yeah, it's the elephant in the room, right?
It is.
And I think it's a question a lot of people have.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile the theory laid out in the manifesto with the brutal reality of what happened in places like the Soviet Union or Cambodia?
It's a crucial distinction to make between the theory and its application.
Right.
The manifesto itself, it doesn't offer a blueprint for governing a state.
Okay.
It's more of a critique of capitalism and a call for revolution.
Yeah.
And, many scholars argue that those regimes, they were distortions of Marx's original vision, often shaped by, very specific cultural and historical circumstances that had little to do with the text itself.
So are you saying that we can't hold Marx and Engels accountable for what happened in these regimes?
Well, it's not about assigning blame. It's about recognizing that ideas can be interpreted and implemented in vastly different ways, and that historical context really matters.
Right.
Think of it this way. The manifesto provided a framework for understanding class struggle and, critiquing capitalism, but it didn't dictate the specific actions of leaders who came decades later.
That makes sense. But even if we set aside those historical examples, there are still some pretty valid criticisms of Marx's economic theories, right?
Of course, one common criticism is that he underestimated the adaptability of capitalism.
Okay.
Critics argue that he failed to foresee how capitalism could evolve and reform itself, responding to some of the very critiques that he raised.
Right.
I mean, think about the rise of the welfare state labor unions and regulations aimed at curbing the excesses of the free market.
Okay, and there's another kind of interesting wrinkle here. Marx himself lived in poverty.
Yeah.
And was financially supported by Engels, whose family wealth came from, wait for it, a capitalist textile business.
Yeah, that's right.
It's kind of an interesting irony.
It certainly highlights the complexities and contradictions, both in Marx's own life and in the broader debate about his ideas.
But even with all these controversies, the Communist Manifesto continues to be relevant.
It does.
I mean, it sparked debate and inspired movements for over 175 years.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because some of its core themes resonate with contemporary anxieties and concerns.
Okay.
I think about the, growing worries about income inequality, the rise of automation and the gig economy, the increasing power of multinational corporations. These are all issues that echo Marx's critiques of capitalism.
It's like we're seeing a resurgence of interest in...
Exactly. People are still grappling with the same fundamental questions about power, fairness, and the distribution of wealth.
Right.
And whether you agree with his solutions or not, Marx's analysis provides a framework for understanding these debates.
So what does all of this mean for, our listener?
Yeah.
Why should they care about a 175-year-old pamphlet written by two German philosophers?
Because the Communist Manifesto isn't just some historical document.
Right.
It's a lens through which we can examine the world around us.
Okay.
It's a way of understanding the forces that shape our lives, even if we don't always realize it.
It encourages us to ask these critical questions about the systems we live under.
Yeah.
And the assumptions we often take for granted.
Think about it this way. Do you ever feel a sense of disconnect between your work and the final product or service you're contributing to? Do you ever feel like you're just a cog in a machine?
Okay.
That's something Marx called alienation of labor, and it's a feeling that's all too common in today's workplace.
Or perhaps you found yourself in discussions about, like, the role of government in regulating the economy,
Yep.
or addressing issues like wealth disparity.
Those are all questions that stem from the debates that Marx and Engels helped to spark with their manifesto.
So this deep dive, it isn't about telling you what to think.
It's not?
It's about giving you the tools to think critically and form your own informed opinions.
And speaking of informed opinions, we've got one more part of our deep dive to go.
Okay.
In the final section, we'll explore the lasting legacy of the Communist Manifesto and consider some thought-provoking questions that will leave you pondering long after this episode ends.
Okay, so we've dug into the historical context, the main arguments, and we've even wrestled with some of the controversies surrounding the Communist Manifesto.
Yeah.
But now let's tackle the big question.
Okay.
What's the lasting impact of this text?
Yeah.
What makes it relevant in the 21st century?
Well, for starters, it's hard to overstate the influence this little pamphlet has had on political and economic thought. You know, it's like Marx and Engels threw this intellectual grenade into the world, and the shock waves are still being felt today.
I mean, it helped to shape political movements, inspired revolutions, and it continues to inform debates about capitalism, inequality, and the role of the state.
Yeah.
Not bad for something written over 175 years ago.
It's pretty impressive. What's remarkable is how some of the core themes of the manifesto resonate with, contemporary concerns.
Right.
We see echoes of Marx's critique of capitalism in discussions about income inequality, the gig economy, the concentration of corporate power, issues that are front and center in many parts of the world today.
It's like we're having a conversation with Marx and Engels across the centuries.
Yeah.
Grappling with the same fundamental questions about fairness, justice, and the kind of world we want to live in.
Exactly. And even for those who, vehemently disagree with Marx's proposed solutions.
Right.
The questions he raised about worker alienation, the role of the state, the tension between individual liberty and collective good. These are questions that continue to shape political discourse.
You know, it's interesting. The Communist Manifesto is almost like a Rorschach test.
It is.
People see in it what they want to see, a blueprint for revolution, a warning about the dangers of capitalism, a historical curiosity.
Right.
But I think the most valuable way to approach it is as a tool for critical thinking.
I agree.
It's not about, like, blindly accepting or rejecting everything Marx and Engels wrote.
Right.
It's about using their analysis to examine the world around us.
Yeah.
And ask ourselves some tough questions.
Oh.
What kind of world do we want to live in?
Yeah.
How can we create a more just and equitable society?
These are questions that go beyond any single ideology or political system.
Right. And I think that's a key part of the manifesto's enduring legacy.
Yeah.
It forces us to engage in these debates, to question assumptions, to consider different perspectives.
Now, there's one question that wasn't explicitly addressed in the manifesto itself, but I think it's a crucial one to consider. Marx and Engels called for the overthrow of capitalism.
Right.
But could some of their concerns about inequality exploitation, the concentration of power, be addressed through reforms within the existing system?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
Can capitalism be reformed from within to create a more just and equitable world?
Right.
Or does true change require a more radical transformation?
It's a debate that continues to rage today, and there are no easy answers.
But I think that's what makes this deep dive into the Communist Manifesto so valuable.
I agree.
It equips you with the knowledge and the insights to grapple with these complex questions.
Yeah.
And form your own informed opinions.
So as we wrap up, I would encourage you to continue exploring these ideas. Read the Communist Manifesto for yourself.
Yeah.
See what resonates with you, what challenges your assumptions, and don't be afraid to question, to debate, to think critically.
That's what this deep dive has been all about, giving you the tools to engage in these important conversations and to become a more informed and engaged citizen. Thanks for joining us on this journey.